Hey, Redcon Raider here, with special thanks to the Raiders, the fine folks who help make these videos possible, including but not limited to Matthew Smith, Revenant, Eloise, A Nerd in Warpaint, Dragon Matrix 7, Eerie V23, Excelsior, Gottlieb, Kazorm, Nathan Welch Jr., Robbie B., Thomas Piatkowski, Trip Hop and Skip, and Valenrook. Thanks for your support, guys. That said, let's get started. And welcome back to Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous. As today, we settle in for another fairly casual Wrath Reader episode. It's been a while since we've done one of these. 20 episodes, I think. Which really just goes to show how much they front-loaded the first act of the game with all sorts of books and notes and other lore items just to help define the setting for new players, which I do appreciate. I mean, as I've mentioned before, I am by no means an expert on the setting, so this stuff really helps. That said, we've got some downtime after our recent dragon hunts, plural. So we'll just read through what we've got. I'll share some initial thoughts, try to add some context. And, we'll get back to some proper adventuring with episode 70. A Chronicle of Failure. Anonymous, 4640. A notice in large letters on the book's binding reads, "This book has been banned within the borders of Mendev." Taken from the account of a noble Mendevian warrior, veteran of 2 Crusades, who was grievously wounded and is currently receiving treatment in a hospital in Andoran. The First Crusade, intended to purge the lands of Sarkorian of the Demon Scourge, was called up in 4622. The loss of Eredin was still a raw wound in the hearts of the faithful, and those who answered the call of the Church of Iomedae channeled their grief and fury toward a new cause. The defense of Mendev and the liberation of Kelid lands from the spawn of the Abyss who at that time were reveling in the ruins of Sarkorian. Many answered the call of the Inheritor's followers, and fought under the banners of the Crusaders. Illustrious warriors ventured forth into the lands captured by the demon pestilence, bringing with them cleansing fire and long-absent hope. Ere long, the filthy hordes were driven out of the western reaches of Mendev into the Sarkorian steppe, and beyond as far as the Threshold Fortress, which to this day remains the beating heart of the World Wound. In 4630, having pursued the demons beyond the north bounds of Sarkorian and secured the borders, the Church of Iomedae declared the First Crusades complete. But alas, what the valiant liberators thought was the closing chapter to a victorious campaign was but the prelude to a tragedy that is unfolding today before our very eyes. 2 years ago, an endless wave of demons poured forth from the North Mounds into the Kelid's plains. The fortresses that had so recently stood strong on Mendev's borders were washed away in this unstoppable flood. The Second Crusade was called up without delay, but it was too late. The source of the corruption, the World Wound, opened its putrid maw wider to disgorge not scattered hordes, but full-fledged armies led by monstrous generals. The Second Crusade goes on, but the morale of Golarion's defenders is at its lowest ebb. Neither the Church of Iomedae nor the courageous Crusaders have the power to overcome the demons that have now overrun Sarkorian. There will be no turning point on this war. All we can do now is wait for death on the borders of Mendev, which has not yet bowed down before the hordes of the Abyss, and pray to the gods that the World Wound does not expand yet again, delivering new horrors into our world. Oof, yeah, that's grim, but it does track based on what we have heard and seen of the 5 Crusades thus far, the Mendevian Crusades. As we well know at this point, it was definitely premature for them to declare victory at the end of the First Crusade. All they'd done at that point was push back the initial waves of unorganized demonic opportunists, who, while they had the element of surprise on their side, were really just going at it apparently hoping that their number and surprise and sheer ferocity would allow them to overthrow the mortal realm. And that was when the Crusaders were arguably at their strongest. You know, they were still fresh and unfatigued. They were outraged at the mysterious death of Eredin, and they had celestial allies on the field. Now, though, you've got 200 years worth of attrition and battle fatigue and complications layered on top of that. Discari's more organized. Baphomet set up spy rings in the Third Crusade. You've got infighting since the Fourth Crusade, plus growing political shenaniganery between the various other countries that are more removed from the conflict. The Crusades have always just reacted to new threats, but they always peter out before they actually get to rooting out the original cause, which, of course, is no way to ultimately win this conflict. Soldier Humor, 5th edition, revised and expanded. There once was a ram-headed lad named Baphomet. Everyone laughed at Baphomet, both demons and cultists alike. Baphomet cried a lot, then ran to his mama, Lamashtu. "No one likes me, and they say I'm strange." And to that, Lamashtu said, "You're perfectly fine, my boy. Just please quit your bleeding. Or better yet, go chew some more grass." I don't know if I really get that one, but okay, sure. There once was a demon named Discari, and his swarm was driving him crazy, all buzzy and bitey. No matter what he tried, he just couldn't get rid of them. So he went to a demon healer for some poison. A week passed, and the healer asked him, "How's the poison? The locusts all gone now?" And Discari said, "I drank the whole bottle, and I completely forgot about those pests. Thing is, now I need something for this killer constipation." Discari says to Baphomet, "Looky here at these nags I bought for my stable. Pure demon stock. If you mount one, it'll get you to the edge of the abyss in a flash." "Big deal. Lamashtu is so much better. Once I mounted her, I got promoted to Demon Lord." Inappropriate, but I do appreciate that it's an actual joke, I guess. Oh boy. Once some cultists caught a Mendevian Crusader and went about torturing him. "Tell us when we should attack you." "Right now. Our fortresses are ruined. Our cities are starving. The people are fleeing. We could really use some prisoners." What? A soldier asks his officer, "How come Baelors have red skin?" The officer says, "You see, there are these monkeys with asses that are bright red." "But Baelor skin is all red." "Exactly. That's because a Baelor is one big ass." Sure. Okay, we're getting into some slightly fraught territory here, but that does very much remind me of, like, your classic early 20th century sort of war propaganda. Jokes that aren't really intended to be funny so much as they are intended to just sort of demean or dehumanize your opponents to make it easier for you to deal with them, you know, thinking of them as ugly and incompetent and unlikable. Though in this case they are demons, so I guess it's okay. Like, I mean, there's no metaphor there. They are literally abyssal spawn forged from the literal dregs of humanity and other assorted mortal races. Humor is subjective. Different people find different things funny. I don't think these are supposed to be funny. They're just supposed to help soldiers cope. We will leave it at that. The Acts of Iomedae. Once they saw their leader's sword broken by dark magics, the soldiers wavered. A murmur shook their ranks, and many fell to their knees, heralding this as an ill omen that foretold of their inescapable deaths at the hands of the undead. And Iomedae thus spoke. "For as long as my will is strong, and my faith immaculate, no arcane shade shall stop me." And the inheritor raised the hilt with the shattered blade before her, and illuminated herself with Eredin's holy sign, and began her prayer to her divine patron. And as each word escaped her lips, the soldiers' hearts were filled with grace and faith. Their weary bodies had their strength restored, and the lurking shadows were cast out of their souls. Her prayer finished, Iomedae, alight with Eredin's blessing once more, thus spoke. I swear it on my life that my resolve to bring justice to the unholy will not falter while the evil of the whispering tyrant devours Golarion, and my hand will not rest until every last minion of Tar-Baphon falls to the ground, unmoving. And with these words spoken, Iomedae placed her hand, glowing with light, upon the broken blade. And in that instant, her righteous wrath and her pure heart reforged the blade whole once more. And thus did she perform the 6th of her 11 feats of greatness. Yeah, the 11 Acts of Iomedae, as outlined in many of the divine source books for Pathfinder, and a few of the short stories and whatnot too. Those are the 11 great deeds performed by Iomedae prior to her ascension to godhood, when she was still just a mortal servant of Eredin. Though, ultimately, I think the real big takeaway from this particular one is that it focuses on Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant, one of many lich lords that raised an undead army and marched on the lands of the living. But, as Soso recently pointed out during our first diplomatic meeting, Tar-Baphon is back and currently waging war in Lastwall, which is itself the focus of a separate adventure path that just happens to take place right after Wrath of the Righteous, like a couple of years after. That does make me wonder if that might be the next big campaign that Owlcat is setting their sights on. Though obviously they've got that Warhammer thing going on now too, so who's to say? I mean, personally, I'd kind of like to see them try to tackle Strange Aeons, but that's a weird one. So yeah, I mean, of the paths that take place after Wrath, Ironfang Invasion or Tyrant's Grasp would probably make the most sense. Though I do remember that right after Kingmaker came out, one of the devs commented they'd love to do Skull and Shackles. But, you know, given that that was like 1 year after Deadfire had just come out, I understand why they didn't end up doing that. A shame, though. I would have loved to play a gunslinger. The Adventures of Brim the Crusader by Nels Kramihr. When the entire retinue had barged into the tent, everyone commenced their hollering at the same time. The commanding officer, who wasn't prepared for this sudden barrage, gasped for air in righteous indignation for the first few minutes. Then, once his lungs were finally full again, barked with such force that all fell silent. In the ensuing quiet, Brim took the initiative and reported hastily. "Sir, Private Brim reports. We've caught an Abracandaloo." The stern quartermaster, having caught the scoundrel responsible for the chaos red-handed, was about to express his outrage. But it was too late. As soon as he heard about the captured demon, the officer demanded to see the quarry immediately. The retinue, joined by the officer, his guard, secretary, courier, and a groom who happened to be passing by, advanced to the outskirts, where the recent events had taken place. Upon seeing the huge demon thrashing about in his magical cage, the officer couldn't help but exclaim in delight. Except the spiteful quartermaster then pushed his way through the crowd, and nasally whined in the officer's ear. "Sir, just look at what cost these buffoons caught one lousy demon." The officer took his eyes off the Abracandaloo, looked around, and threw his hands up. "What's all this, Private Brim?" "Sir, what do you mean?" "What's this massive pit?" That was our first trap. The Abracandaloo was supposed to drop down once he'd seen the bait. Took a lot of effort, this pit. We broke 2 shovels, all for naught." "And why are the shrubs smoking?" Once the Abracandaloo figured us out, he chased us around, throwing his magic all over the place." "And why is the tree broken?" "Because that jerk tried to pull me down from it after I'd climbed up there with a loot." "Hold on. Why would you climb it with a loot?" "Well, first of all, I was bait. I played some marches to provoke the Abracandaloo's hatred for all things of beauty. And second, I was running from a demon, and I couldn't leave the loot. I borrowed it from the bard in our regiment, and he packs a good punch, that one." The officer frowned, ignoring the quartermaster's snivels. "Right," he exhaled at last. "Dispose of the demon. Private Brim is to be rewarded. All the equipment lost by him and his mates is to be deducted from his pay. And will someone put out those blasted shrubs already?" Okay, okay. That one very much feels like a reference that's going over my head. That feels like an almost shot-for-shot reenactment of some scene from a movie or comedy show, like F Troop or MAShed or something, but seen through like a Pathfinder filter. It's cute, but I don't think there's much deeper meaning there. I think it's just a cute reference. Nels Kramihr. Might be a deliberate misspelling or an anagram. Maybe y'all can help me out with that one. But for now, we'll move on. Old Sarkorian diary in a burned binding. Right. That's the one we found at the ruins of Greengate. The diary's binding is scorched, and many pages are missing. Those that remain are covered in dirt and mold. Between the ink lettering that is spread and run, and the patches of rot, it is possible to make out certain phrases. A troop brought news from the west. The plains have fallen, the clans have been slaughtered, and the beasts are feasting on the slain warriors. A few survivors were found, but attempts to get them to the fortress failed. Our own warriors fought their way back with difficulty. The outlying fortifications are overrun with the scum. Only reinforcements from the east will have any chance of breaking through this noose that is slowly closing around our neck. All we can do is wait. They attacked from the sky. The tower is still standing, but burnt out, along with Zonak and the others. There was no time to light the funeral pyres. We scooped up the bodies and tossed them back behind the walls before we were caught by another wave. Rolug's squad were stationed at the deserted post. Most of them have been maimed, so they're not much use on the walls. They vanished into thin air. The smoke makes day and night bleed into one, and watching the eastern horizon is getting more and more difficult. The hope of seeing the banners of Mendev has kept the dread of death at bay for some. Without this comfort, yesterday's warriors turned into whimpering curs. The beasts lose their last grain of fear in the dark. One of the sentries was plucked right off the wall in front of 5 of his fellows. Half of the left tower is sinking into the opening fracture. We barricaded the doors, but the smoke pouring through the hole took down 3 of us. He was spitting, guffawing, lambasting the foreign traders, and screaming that Mendevians aren't coming. Yuno smashed the lunatic's skull in. Our days are numbered. The smoke makes breathing all but impossible. We sit out the time between attacks in the cellars, where at least there's some fresh moisture that trickles down the walls. Our sentries are disappearing one after another, suffocating in the smoke, or snatched up by the claws of some flying beast. We will open the gates in an hour. Let those who trace our final days see that the last sons of Sarkoris died standing tall. One more page is glued in among the final sheets. The page is made from finer paper and is emblazoned with an inscription in ornate lettering. I discovered this journal in the fortress's underground refuge soon after clearing the place of demons. The defenders of the Green Gates met their deaths with honor. We could not save you, but your courage stands as an example to every person who picks up a weapon today in the name of Galarion. I vow that our newly formed crusade, which already proceeds apace through these mutilated lands, will finish what the Sarkorians started, just as I have finished this journal. The banners of the dead will fly under clear skies once more. Yeah, somehow I don't think that's actually how it turned out, but it is good to have dreams. Man, That is quite a swing. From the comedic antics of Brim the Crusader to the double tragedy of the doomed defenders of Greengate. I mean, obviously, the original defenders, the native Sarkorians, didn't fare particularly well, as is spelled out here in gruesome detail. But then, as Arilu pointed out, the place was retaken by Mendevian Crusaders later, who set up the Bell of Mercy there. And then they, too, met a grim end. Most likely killed during the Second Crusade when the World Wound expanded. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left a relic like the Bell of Mercy behind. Not a lot I think we can really take away from this story, but it is a nice bit of context and background to one of the many locations we visited. And honestly, that's nice. I appreciate that. I will very rarely complain about getting more details about the world we're immersed in. Torn out pages from a Sarkorian book. Years later, into the mountain valley, which for many years had lain uninhabited and had fallen into a state of desolation, rode the prideful rider. His steed was wild and fleet, his tall step helm shone like a gilded mask, and his sharply curved bow could strike from thrice times 300 paces away. Dauntlessly did the rider ride into the remains of the settlement and, drawing up beside the stone pillars into which were carved the images of the ancestors, he bowed low before them, and then he sliced open his palm and blooded those same stones. Then the rider unbridled his mount and sent him off, for his loyal companion would be of no use to him in the cramped caves. The rider checked his bowstring, descended into the depths, sat down in the largest of the caves, and waited. Soon the pack appeared. They were hungry, wasted, and as such even more vicious, for it had been long since they had eaten the human flesh they so favored. But the rider pulled his bowstring tight and let fly arrow after arrow. The darkness was no obstacle, as he used sound to guide his arm, until each, down to the very last, was stuck full. Perishing, the last of the pack creatures opened its maw, and in the follower's voice asked, "Who are you, mighty rider? Who does not fear to tread here and end my cursed and rotten life? Tell me your name, my lord, and tell me from what noble clan do you hail?" The rider removed his tall helm with its gilded mask, and long braids tumbled free from beneath it. It was no man, but the daughter of the wise patriarch, who on the brink of death made her swear one final vow, the vow of vengeance. For years she had roamed, bearing in her heart cold malice and righteous fury for all sorcerers and their ilk. For years her arrows had cut down despicable sorcerers, while her conviction had only grown in strength and certainty. And at last the hour had come for her to return and avenge the clan whose name has now been condemned to obscurity. She did not answer the dying monster, for vile sorcerers are undeserving of even a word from a worthy person's lips. She burned the pack's stinking bodies, left the caves, bowed before the ancestors one last time, and departed, never again to return. We've got some, Red Sonja vibes going on there. Classic Red Sonja, as envisioned by Robert Howard, with a Y, not the version a lot of people are probably more familiar with from later films and comics. That's when they added the infamous scale mail bikini. I mean, I know the whole suffer not a sorcerer to live thing is more a nod to the ancient Sarkorian culture, wherein they systematically oppressed and hunted and imprisoned or slew practitioners of such foul magics. But it also does have a very strong Conan the Barbarian sort of never trust a wizard vibe to it. From a Pathfinder standpoint, I have been told that this is a clue related to whatever puzzle that was that we couldn't resolve back in Pelluris Fall, the thing with the daggers and the star door, which may or may not even be something we can complete as a trickster. Some people have told me that it's locked to the angel path, but other people have told me that they completed it with other paths as well, so I don't know. Regardless, based on context, I think the general idea here is that ultimately we would have had to collect all the daggers of the various tribe leaders, and this story would imply that at least one of them wouldn't have been interred at Pelura's Fall, the one carried by this outcast tribe leader. He was disgraced, so it wouldn't have been interred at Pelura's Fall like all the others. It would have been carried by his vengeful daughter. So I'm guessing we'd have to track down wherever she ended up instead. Of course, that's mostly just speculation on my part. It's all content I've never actually gotten to. Alright, so that's it for books and notes. I believe we just have a small assortment of relics left. So let's give those a peek. Altar of the First Retrievers. Barely a soul has ever managed to escape the revenge of the demons. The fiends dispatch their retrievers, the creepy mechanical spiders they created for hunting, to silently track down their enemies, runaway slaves, or renegade cultists. As legend has it, the first retriever was made by the demon lord Hagenti, the lord of transformation. Throughout the ages, the first retriever fell under the ownership of different demon masters, but was an impeccable servant to all. A mortal heretic and twice renegade finally put a halt to the first retriever's murderous servitude. The Templar of the Ivory Labyrinth, whose name is unknown, repented of his deeds and left the cult. The first retriever was sent forth on his trail, but never returned. Both retriever and prey fell in the fight. Later, the demons discovered the retriever's remains and cobweb, and turned them into an altar. The retriever's ravenous hunger seeped into the altar. Decades later, worshippers took their sacrifices there, the ripped-out teeth of all who tried to flee demon's wrath, but were caught and slain. Teeth. Yeah, can't really argue with that. That is the stuff of nightmares. The Demon Lord Hagenti. I think that's the first time we're ever hearing his name. I don't think he has anything to do with the Mendevian Crusades. But it's possible I just wasn't looking in the right places. I haven't studied everything. The Ivory Labyrinth is a bit more on point, because that is obviously the lair of Baphomet, who is very much involved in the current invasion. And that, I guess, is who the first retriever was working for when it went on that final fateful mission, seeking a rogue Templar of the Ivory Labyrinth and dying in the process, though still eliminating its prey. That does make me wonder, we did find that skeletal corpse near the body of a retriever back at Leper's Wound? Though no, I guess that couldn't be the first retriever, because this clearly states that demons recovered the first retriever and turned it into this altar, which they used in subsequent years for their toothsome sacrifices. Not sure if this is really relevant to the overarching Wrath campaign, but we did learn about a new demon lord and the origin of retrievers, so that's cool. Let's see what we've got next. Faultless Daybreak. In the course of the First Crusade, a group of Sarenrae worshipping healers went to the aid of Galfrey's army. However, in the dark of the night, they were attacked by a gang of demons and demon-worshipping cultists who had edged into their rear. Inappropriate. Though unskilled in battle, the clerics and healers fought desperately, repelling one attack after another. But the sides were not evenly matched. No one was left to repel the final attack. All of the Sarenrae adepts were wounded. No one was able to raise their sword. So they met the enemy with prayer. and a miracle happened. The morning broke an hour early, and the first rays of dawn expelled the demons into the abyss. The light healed the most terrible wounds of the mortals, and brought the fallen, whether righteous or sinful, back to life. Both the believers and the misguided shed their tears. They fell to their knees as one and prayed to the bright goddess for forgiveness. And forgiveness was granted. Not a single mortal died on that bloody night. The last and the brightest ray of dawn blinded everyone, and took the shape of the sacred symbol of Sarenrae. They named the relic the Faultless Daybreak, and placed it on the breast of a statue mounted on the site where the miracle had happened. Wow, that is quite a story. And, it's interesting because this story, along with some of the other ones we've read today, really kind of highlight just how much more active and potent the various divine and celestial entities were during the early stages of the World Wound conflict, before it dragged on for like 200 years, and I guess more demon lords and deities ended up getting involved in the fray. I suppose at this point you've got so many powerful people on both sides that it's created kind of a divine stalemate or gridlock. No one wants to overexpose themselves for fear that one of their divine opponents will swoop in and try to take advantage of an opening. Though Discari did get pretty bold with his personal appearance back in Canabris. Though it was a very brief appearance. I mean, he did dip out pretty quickly after destroying the Wardstone. He was clearly just there for that one very specific thing, and maybe to retrieve the body of Tarendalev. But then vanished again, I assume, before other deities could rally and swoop in to confront him face to face. I mean, obviously the story here is largely just an excuse as to why this divine relic was lost in the World Wound and has now found its way into our meaty grasp. If I had to guess, I'd say this thing can heal allies and maybe convert or blind foes. It touches on all three of those elements in the story. Voracious Jumble. The mage Zymus was a famous adventurer and wicked fighter. His feats, now seldom recalled, were as countless as his scars. Zymus was not driven by thirst for fame, but by a rare sense of responsibility inherent to his nature. Therefore, the day when the brave mage lost his arm in a fight with a werewolf became his tragedy. How could he, so strong and solid, retire now, when so many still needed his help? Without a second thought, Zymus took an arm from a fallen enemy to replace his own. Thus, his decline began. For years, again and again, Zymus took the limbs of defeated enemies to heal his wounds. Zymus turned from a hero into a monster. It was rumored that there was no actual flesh left of the body he had been born with. First, Zymus was shunned, then driven away, and finally declared a monster. The mage fled into the wasteland to become an ominous legend people scare their children with. Simple, straightforward, and part of a recurring theme we're starting to see here. The whole concept of ostensibly good people going to increasingly extreme measures in their efforts to overcome the threats, the evil of the World Wound. Though some more selflessly than others. I mean, by this story at least, it sounds like Zymus was a pretty cool dude. Monster bod notwithstanding. Maybe not the most restrained, but it doesn't say anything about him really becoming corrupted, at least on a spiritual level. More just physically, to the point where he scared people and they wouldn't work with him anymore. You know, contrasting that to like Maliander Lind, the Crest of Lind, I think, which is a relic we're currently working on. I think that story really sort of highlighted a guy who had embraced dark magics, which are probably more dangerous, in his efforts to fight the forces of the World Wound. Or Zacharias. Zacharias is a great example of that. Again, you know, he saw that the Crusade was faltering, was unable to overcome the forces of the World Wound as they were, and his answer was to turn to forbidden necromancies instead, though once he converted himself into a lich, he of course kind of lost sight of that specific goal. He was beholden to carry it out, but his priorities had shifted. It was more a chore to get out of the way, so that he could go become, I don't know, the Whispering Tyrant 2.0, I guess. I do find it interesting that they never really hint at what his fate might have been, just that he was driven away and became an ominous legend. Though, obviously, he ended up in the Worldwound at some point. We found his remains there. Well, not his remains. I mean, it did say they're specifically still living and writhing. They were in that cauldron that was spawning all sorts of strange mutant monsters. You know, the thought does occur that perhaps we may have just ended up making the same mistake that all of Zymus' former allies did. Maybe he was actually still active and still creating, like, his own army to take the fight to the Worldwound, and we just came in, jumped to conclusions, and ended up killing a bunch of monstrous but well-meaning allies. Or he got captured or corrupted or something, and that was, in fact, an army of monsters. That is also a very distinct possibility. Yeah, an interesting assortment of anecdotes this time around. Some stuff directly relevant to what we're currently doing, others not so much, but giving us some interesting food for thought. And of course, as always, I come away from this with the benefits of an ever-expanding knowledge of the Pathfinder setting, which is the primary purpose of these reader episodes. Though there is sometimes a more tangible benefit to actually reading these things. There we go. The Acts of Iomedae. A +1 competence bonus on savings throws against disease and sickening effects. Nice, okay. Not the most exciting of passive bonuses, but a +1 on saves is a +1 on saves. And goodness knows, we've certainly started running into foes who can disease and or sicken us. I was hoping for a bit more, but a passive bonus is better than no passive bonuses. And we can now officially retire this assortment of curio to our cabinet of ever-growing lore items. Though we'll hold on to the relic items, we need those for the project. Also, we have these other random things here. I don't know what these are for. I've been keeping them in our inventory just because they don't get auto-sold like a lot of the trash items, but maybe that's just a bug. Anyway, with that, we are officially done. At least until we gather another big stack of lore items to pour over. That said, we'll hit the pause button for now. We'll get this thing gussied up with some light editing, some fancy text blurbs and images and whatnot. And based on the current production schedule, we'll probably slot this in around episode 70 or so. I'll get that sorted. And as always, feel free to share your own feedback, insights, introspection on the strange tales that we have gone over. And we will get back to some proper adventuring next time round. See you then. Oh, and remember, although I do love playing Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official websites. And if you'd like to help support the channel, then feel free to push the buttons that do the things, or maybe even check out the Patreon, or the new YouTube memberships. Links are in the description.